Hello, everyone. This is Leanne Allegretto, your service hydrologist at the National Weather Service in Missoula. I'm bringing you the first spring flood outlook of the season. We'll be talking about western Montana and north central Idaho conditions and what's to come as of right now. Today, this recording is March 27th, 2025. So we'll discuss how things are going to look in the months to come based on today's data. So let's start with the water year precipitation so far. The water year starts on October 1st, excuse me, and continues through the last recorded day for this graphic, which was March 25th, 2025. And what stands out right away is the amount of orange and yellow and even red in western Montana and north central Idaho. And what this shows is the seasonal precipitation so far. This is the percent of normal. So for this time of year, March 25th, going all the way back through October 1st, most of our basins are in the 70 to 90% of normal range, which is pretty good. It's not bad, but it's not great. And then there are the ones that are orange and even red, which is about 50 to 70% of normal or even below 50% of normal. And that's where we start to get a little bit more worried about how our precipitation is panning out so far for the water year. Now, if you take a look specifically at March itself, the graphic on the left is the current month's precipitation. Same format, percent of normal for this time of year for the month of March. And then on the right, there is the temperature departure. So, how warm or cool were we compared to normal? So, we'll start with the monthly precipitation on the left. And you can see there's a lot of green, which is great. That's about 110 to 130% of normal. There's even some dark blue in there, which is above 100%, 130% of normal. But again, in southwest Montana, around Granite, Deer Lodge, Silverbow County, we're looking at the 50 to 70% of normal. So you can see where the precipitation favored certain basins and certain parts of north central Idaho, such as like the Lochsaw Basin, and then parts of western Montana along the divide and across northwest Montana. They received the most so far this month. But across the board, if you look at temperature departures, most, if not all, of our locations were to some degree warmer than normal for the month of March. You can see this red basin. This is right around Flathead Lake. That was about 3 to 6 degrees above normal for the trend of March. There were some -1, so like 1 degree cooler than normal to 1 degree warmer than normal in central Idaho and along the divide. So, how does that all measure up to snowpack? So, the snowpack status as of March 27th, this is the snow water equivalent for subbasins across Idaho and in western Montana. And what that means, if you're not familiar with it, if you were to take the amount of snowpack that we have as of this date and melt it down, this would be the percent of snow water equivalent for between 1991 and 2020, comparatively so. And across the board, you can see we're in the green, which is 90% to 109%, which is great. Some basins in central Idaho are in that 110 to 129%, which is even better. But then we have the Blackfoot region east of Missoula. That's at 86%. So that's not so great. And that's probably our driest basin with our lowest river levels. And that's been the case since pretty much 2024, 2023. Speaking of which, here's last year, same date, March 26, 2024. We were doing a lot worse last year. A lot more yellows and oranges, some greens over in central Idaho, but for the most part we had much less snowpack last year at this time compared to the current year. Now, these are tiny dots, so just bear with me, but we're going to start heading into what are the rivers doing. We've talked about the water that's available for runoff in the snowpack and how much precipitation we've gotten. So now let's take a look at the rivers themselves. At a quick glance, this map shows the probability of main stem rivers exceeding their flood stage through July 1st of 2025. So the bulk, just if you were to glance at this, the bulk are in the blues, which is in the low range, not great probabilities of exceeding flood stages. However, there is one tiny green dot up here, and that's the Flathead, and I'll get to that. near Columbia Falls, that's got a 30% chance of exceeding its flood stage. And that's the only point in our forecast area for Missoula that shows any chance of actually hitting their flood stage. That does not mean, I repeat, that does not mean that any one of these rivers could or could not exceed their flood stage. This is just looking at it right now, the probabilities of exceeding flood stage through July 1st. Any change in conditions could make this less or more likely to flood. So just keep that in mind. So let's go through the waters. We'll start in Idaho first. This is our Clearwater River, the 2 points, South Fork of the Clearwater at Stites and Orofino. Clearwater River at Orofino. So these graphs, this is going to be applied to every single one of these graphics going forward. Each one of these graphics has the flood stage for this point in the river. And then what you see here is the exceedance probability, the stage, discharge, and probable date of the peak of the river flow. So what this means is 95% exceedance probability. So this is the lowest, this is the most likely chance of it hitting 5.78 feet, and that would be around April 17th. So if you go down to the 50% is highlighted in each one of these graphics because that's the median basically. And that's this 50% at Stites shows a river level of 6.48 feet or a cubic feet per second, 5772. That the probable date of this occurrence is May 27th. So if you look at the 5% exceedance probability, this is like the least likely, or we'll say the 1 in 10 chance that it could reach 7.84 feet, and that would happen around June 20th. So this gives you a picture of what the river and the river levels and the amount of flow in the rivers could do around these dates based on current data and current projections. So the Clearwater River at Orofino, the 50th percentile, right around 12.88 feet, would occur around May 22nd. What you notice in both of these graphics is that neither of these points along the Clearwater River show it exceeding their flood stages. So that's good news. Let's do the same thing at the Salmon River. The flood stage is 7.5 feet, and we do see that there is a 5% exceedance probability of it reaching 7.61, which is above the flood stage, and that would be around late June, June 24th. Again, this is the lowest probability, so the least likely scenario, but it is there. And please feel free to pause this recording and kind of digest these numbers in your own time, but for the sake of time, I'm going to keep going. So the Clark Fork, we have a few of these. So this first one is the Clark Fork at Drummond. This is the Clark Fork above Missoula that flows into the city, and then this is the Clark Fork River below Missoula flowing out of the city. So you can see that there is some red here, the 5% probability of the Clark Fork at Drummond reaching 8.01 feet, and that would be around late June. Of course, the flood stage is 8 feet there, so not much above flood stage. But again, that's definitely the lowest probability or the least likely scenario. Little different for the Clark Fork above Missoula. The flood stage is 7.5 feet, and we do see there's a 10% probability of it reaching above flood stage at 7.66 feet around June 13th. The most, the middle of the road, the 50 percentile is 6.33 feet, and that would be around May 29th, so late May. We'd start to see river levels at this height. So again, there is a low probability of the Clark Fork above Missoula reaching flood stage, but again, it looks like it would happen in June, mid to late June, if it happens at all. For the Clark Fork below Missoula, it doesn't seem to hint at any exceedance of flood stage, but it does show a 50% probability of hitting 7.05 feet around June 2nd. This is the Clark Fork River near Plains, and it does show there's a 5% probability of it hitting above flood stage at 16.36 feet, and that would be around June 23rd. The 50th percentile here is about 13.5 feet, and that would be around June 2nd. How about the Bitterroot River? We're going to look at Darby on the left and then Bitterroot River near Missoula. I do have a caveat. The Bitterroot near Missoula gauge will be decommissioned at some point this year. More updates to come, but the USGS will be decommissioning this gauge. That being said, it does not look like the Bitterroot near Darby will hit its flood stage of 7.5 feet at this time. The 50th percentile does show a 5.67 foot stage around May 29th. And the highest, the 5% would be the highest flood stage, not flood stage, river stage of 6.82, which is below flood stage around late June. The Bitterroot near Missoula, it does show a 5% probability of exceeding, 5% probability of exceeding that 11-foot flood stage around June 27th. But the most likely scenario would be around 9 feet in late May to early June. The Flathead River, which I did talk about earlier in the presentation, that will come second. That's at the Flathead River at Columbia Falls, but let's talk about the middle fork of the Flathead near West Glacier. It has a flood stage of 10 feet, but it does not look like at any point in the spring, as of right now, it will exceed that 10-foot flood stage. However, there is that 30% I talked about earlier for the Flathead at Columbia Falls. Its flood stage, when the river level, so bear with me. The flood stage at the Flathead River at Columbia Falls is 13 feet as long as Flathead Lake levels are 28, 92 feet or lower. The flood stage does move from 13 feet to 14 feet when Flathead Lake levels are above 2,892 feet. So, based on 13 foot, we do have a 30% probability of the river reaching 13.32 or higher on or around and after June 14th. So we're getting close in the 50th percentile. It projects a river stage of 11.86 around early half of June and then goes up from there. So that's something to keep an eye on. Of course, all things considered, we have the North Fork flow, the Middle Fork, and the South Fork and Hungry Horse reservoir storage as well to consider when it comes to this. So if your river near you was not mentioned, then it has very, very low, if no, probability of exceeding its flood stage. But you can find all of that information on the Northwest River Forecast Center's website or our website at weather.gov/Missoula. So let's move forward into the seasonal trends for April, May, and June. Not a whole lot to talk about here. The temperature outlook has us pretty seasonable at equal chances of being above or below normal. So seasonable is good. And our precipitation outlook for April, May, and June is also equal chances for the bulk of north central Idaho and western Montana, although a little sliver down along the Montana-Idaho border here is slightly above normal. I'm sorry, slightly drier than normal. Excuse me. For the April, May, and June timeframe. Then we get to June, July, and August, and it's dry and warm, which, I mean, that's par for the course in our area, but these are subject to change. But right now, it looks like June, July, and August, if you were to average out the temperatures, we would be warmer than normal. And for precipitation, if you were to average it out, the projection is to remain below normal for Idaho and Montana almost the entirety of both of those states. So that was just a quick rundown of things as they stand today on March 27th, 2025. I want to thank you for watching this presentation, and of course, thank you for your support. Additional flood outlooks will be recorded and updated with the newest information, and I'll have those available in the months of April and May and possibly June as we go forward with our runoff season. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.